I was working in the Czech Republic at a kids' summer camp when I was 20. It was nothing like the American summer camps that I've seen on TV, much more relaxed. We owned a huge cabin in the forest just outside of a small town. There were walking tracks around and people would walk past our cabin and field area from time to time. One day I was doing some craft with a small group of children at a table that could be seen from the walking tracks when this guy walks past. He's alone, about 30, has dreads, heavy boots and these patchwork pants on and a loose metal singlet. He stops mid-walk when he spots us and he starts to approach. He asks me in Czech if I have any cigarettes. I tell him, I'm sorry, I don't speak Czech very well, in an attempt for him to give up and leave. I'm trying to be nice because I have 5 kids sitting at the table and I don't want to scare them. He then switches to English and I'm like, oh crap. It was a 50-50 chance he wouldn't speak English in a part of the country like this. He then comments on my tattoos. I have a sleeve, asking me all this stuff. Says that he's getting a new one. He asks about the cigarettes again. I say no and I was being polite about the tattoos, but not encouraging conversation. He asks my name and I tell him and he keeps talking for a bit, but after a while he moves on. I sigh with relief and the day continues on. Later that afternoon, it was around 6. It was still light out and we were killing time before dinner being served. I was in the field outside the cabin with some of the kids running around. Our leaders were doing various activities with the kids, when all of a sudden, another leader got my attention and told me to get the kids inside. I look up and on either side of the field where the trees start, there's a guy dressed similar to the guy from earlier. Standing just back from the tree line, they had spread out and approached from different angles, and then I hear someone shouting my name. We move all the kids inside and lock the doors. The 3 male leaders we have go out to talk to the guys in the forest surrounding our cabin. I can hear them, the guy says. We were hunting for deer. Thought we saw it come through this way. Anyway, I'm a friend of, he says my name, and I start freaking out. What the heck? Is it the guy from the morning? I want to show her my new tattoo. Confused, the leaders come back and are like, who's this guy? They know that I'm not Czech and I don't know many people outside of our circle, so I know that it's odd. I tell them about the morning and that I don't want to see him again. They go back out and tell the guys to leave, and after some fuss and yelling out for me, they leave. The rest of the trip I was paranoid that they would come back, especially at night. Luckily they didn't. Believe it or not, but I always have been the type of person who attracted deranged people. I'm quite young, but I don't count anymore the number of times that I had met creeps. This one, however, I always remember it for several reasons. Firstly, because he was my neighbor, and secondly, because it could have ended up so badly. I first met him when I moved to my actual apartment. It's in a nice house divided into 5 separate apartments, and mine was on the first floor. His was on the ground, and I had to walk in front of his window to get to the front door. At first, I didn't mind him. He looked kind of creepy, but to me, everybody looks creepy. Well, he did get angry at my big brother for only walking in front of his window, but he was never aggressive to me. Plus, I spent most of the time studying, and I was back at my place pretty late. Life was going peacefully. I had finished my studies and got my diploma. I found myself a great partner, and I would have had everything to be happy if it wasn't for my health. It was declining, nothing life-threatening, but I had to stay at my place instead of working. My life was pretty much boring and uneventful until one day, as I was tidying up, my phone rang. Instead of answering it, I just looked through my open window and saw the neighbor staring at me. He was standing there in front of the front door, still and kind of threatening. I asked him if he needed something, and I waited for him to answer, but after a really long silence, he just entered, and I heard his door closing. It was weird, but I had better things to do, so I just went back to sweeping my floor. A week later, all of his shutters were closed. There was an inscription on all of them. Sealed. It didn't look official, more like crooked handwriting in messed black marker. Once again, I brushed it off and I was kinda glad the creepy neighbor was gone. I figured that he got arrested or something. Once again, life was peaceful, and 2 months after his disappearance, a nice dude had started living in the apartment. A great guy, always smiling and ready to help. He had his head shaved like the old neighbor, but was chubby and friendly. Everything was good for a year, but then things went down, and oh boy, how ugly it got. I usually would say hello to the nice neighbor. He would politely ask me about my day, about my partner's day and everything. That day, though, he didn't say hello when I passed his window like he usually does. Instead, he was sitting in his chair, staring at me with dark eyes and following my every move. I still waved at him, smiling. I figured he had had a bad day. Since then, he would pass the daytime sitting in the dark, looking through the window and his nights blasting metal, while he laughed and screamed like a maniac. At this point, neither me or any of my other neighbors could sleep. We kept calling the cops, but they didn't really care about some noise. I don't know when exactly I figured the nice neighbor was the creepy neighbor, but when I did, it left me with a sour taste in my mouth for some reason. Probably because I knew for sure that he had had a history of violence and fights that have gone bad. And then one day, I was at a friend's house for around a week, and my partner was working and he was keeping our apartment safe. I was shopping with my friend when I received a message that made me shiver. While my partner was at work, the neighbor had let himself into our apartment. My partner didn't notice that he had left the door unlocked, and the neighbor had just climbed the stairs, opened our door, and entered. I can't say exactly what happened since I wasn't there, but apparently he had wanted to shave my partner's hair and eyebrow. He was delirious, having a hard time talking and just saying gibberish. After my partner got back, he managed to get him out and close the door. He was merely amused by the whole thing. When I got back, things were getting worse. First, he would stop me and my partner in the street, completely gone, telling us how the only reliable source of information was our toaster. And then he started to corner me. He would wait for me to almost reach the door and would violently open his door. And then he would tell me how I shouldn't go out, how I shouldn't trust anyone but him. It was clear as day how bad his mental health was, as his speech was more and more slurry, and he would take long pauses while staring to the side. And during 2 weeks, he managed to corner me around 4 times. Not much, huh? It was the only 4 times that I was going out alone in those 2 weeks. This period was awful. I could not leave my apartment alone. I could not live my life the way that I wanted. I just stayed locked in my place, waiting for my partner to get back. Even with precaution, I kept meeting him, and the more that I saw him, the more uneasy that I grew. For weeks, it felt like I was a hostage in my own home. I should have called the police. As our encounters were getting more and more regular, he grew agitated. He would fidget, he would look all over, and kept getting closer. There was a point that I could feel his moist breath on my skin. I didn't know what to do. I was terrified to call the cops because all of our other neighbors were on vacation. I was afraid that he would try to hurt me if I called the police. Until this day, I had to meet my boyfriend at a bar near our place. My first mistake was to leave long after my partner did. I quietly climbed down the stairs, didn't make any noise when I opened the door, and tried to sneak away from his window. He saw me and he opened the window, and for the first since what seemed like forever, he told me in clear speech, "Don't go outside, stay at home. If you need anything, come to me or go out Monday at 7 a.m. I frightfully agreed and smiled at him, my hands gripping at my purse. I looked at him, closing his window, and I waited for him to turn his back and started walking away. When he saw me, he screamed, "Don't go!" I saw him reaching for his door. I felt my blood running cold. I was nothing compared to him. I had no strength. I was just a still, quiet, sick person against a massive man. So I ran. I ran for 2 minutes to the bar, passing bystanders who I'm sure stared at me. I ran for my life and kept running like this until I saw my partner and our friends at a table. And then, just then, I cried. I collapsed on the chair and cried for 3 minutes straight. Later, we all went back home, our friends hiding me. My second mistake that day was to convince the others that they could go to the theater just 3 houses away from the apartment, that I would be fine since I would not have to go out. They had laughed. It was hot, so I opened the windows before turning the fan on. I was quietly spending my evening sipping an iced tea and watching stupid videos when somebody had knocked. I knew who it was. There was only one person to pounce on my door like the maniac that he was. I did not answer. I just froze on my couch. The only thing that I was able to think about was that this thin door was the only obstacle between him and me. And then he started screaming. I did not get everything that he said. The fan was covering much of the screaming, but I still can remember some words. Children of the devil, trust, open the door, and the worst one, you'll burn. And then there was the laughing straight out of a horror movie. That's when I heard him laughing that it dawned on me how alone I was. How we were the only 2 people in this whole house. How he could have just snapped the door open and God knows what he could do. I found the force to get up. I went to my bathroom and sat behind the door, and then I cried again, trying to muffle the screaming and the laughing. I texted a friend who convinced me to call the cops. This time they answered. I called too late and he was already back to his apartment when they came. 3 polite knocks and I let them in, trembling. They were 5, one of them on the step of another apartment. He found a glass filled with alcohol partially drank. I can still hear the poison in his voice when he bitterly said, "This guy took liquid courage." They believed me and they reassured me, but at the end of the day, there was nothing that they could do. I could just sit and wait, terrified. After this, I went to the police station and filed a report. I quickly learned that the other 2 people did the same as me. A social worker went to the neighbor, talked to him, and apparently, he swore to not bother me again. After that, it was just loud music in the middle of the night and nothing more. But still, I had this lingering feeling that it wasn't over. For 2 months, everything went fine until one morning I opened my door and I found a beer. I left it there and it was only gone late at night. The next day, same thing. He kept putting beers in front of my door for about a week. It was 10 a.m. and I had just got out of the shower, dressed with a black t-shirt but still in underwear when my doorbell rang. Like I always did, and because my window reaches my belly, I passed my head through the window. There I saw a guy who worked in an office just in front of the house. He was manically screaming at me and doing wide gestures, obviously panicked, but right next to him was the neighbor grinning. It took me a couple of seconds to understand what was going on, way too much preoccupied by the sinister expression of my neighbor. But then I heard it. "Come out! The house is burning!" As I looked in the direction of my neighbor's apartment, sure enough, thick black smoke coming out of the open windows. I just put on some jeans and I grabbed my key. No ID, no cell phone, nothing but my clothes and my key. In the corridor, I smelled the smoke. I coughed a couple of times before running out. I was frightened and I was confused. I was supposed to go to an appointment for a job only 30 minutes from this point, but instead I was watching the house burning. I was fearing for my home being turned into nothing more but a pile of ashes. The neighbor was just standing there, a glass full of an amber looking like liquid and this freaking grin. He was smoking, looking at the smoke while the working guy screamed at him, "You see, I told you that there was someone inside, I told you." I was still watching it all burn, asking myself how long it would take before the fire reached my apartment, when somebody had grabbed my arm. It was a woman, one of my neighbors who also worked next door. She grabbed me and forced me to sit on the bench with her. She took my hand and kept telling the neighbor not to approach me. She gave me water and she helped me by contacting the person that I was supposed to see for the job. Most importantly, she didn't let the neighbor get to me, and she stood in front of me the whole time, doing her best to shield me from him. The firefighters arrived quickly along with the police. They asked him basic questions like whether or not there was a gas inside, but he mocked them. He laughed at them. He tried to smash his glass on a cop's head, and that's when they arrested him. That's when the woman let go of my hand and told me that this time that we were finally free from him. The fire was put down quickly. Only his apartment was burnt thanks to great insulation. However, the levels of carbon monoxide were high enough to kill someone if anyone had stayed. All of his belongings were put out in front of the house. Inside, the walls of the corridor that were once white were left gray, and every place that a screw was left a black stain on the walls. It smelled like smoke and like burnt plastic and wet ashes, but we were fine. The neighbor was sent to a psychiatric hospital and the landlord was finally able to break the contract. That neighbor told me that when he left that morning, there was a beer in front of my door, but when I exited in a hurry, there was nothing. The fire was ruled as accidental and we haven't heard of him since then. Slowly, I was able to go outside without activating my phone camera and gripping my keys like knives. I was able to climb down the stairs freely after all this time. I was finally able to rest, but the belongings stayed for a long time, and each time I passed to get to the front door, I saw his notebooks laying around. I always told myself that I wasn't that kind of person, that I wouldn't snoop, but still curiosity got the best of me. Like I expected, a lot of gibberishes were written down, some bad stuff and a lot of inappropriate symbols. Nothing that abnormal coming from this guy though. And then I found something else, like a log. It was still hard to decipher until it all clicked. Under my eyes were the times when people entered or exited the house. He kept track of everyone's movements. I found my pages quite easily. Each day for at least 6 months, he knew when I was alone. He knew when I was going grocery shopping, how long I left and how I looked when I was back. Each time I passed his window, he would write it down. He would write comments which sometimes made sense and sometimes didn't. And most importantly, when the fire had started, he knew that I was still inside, and he knew that I was the only one left. I closed the thing and just never went to my apartment. I closed the door like you close a case, but still, I silently prayed to never see this guy again, because if we did, I don't know whether or not I would be able to tell this story. Last year, my brother and sister-in-law had bought my husband and I a climbing experience in Wales, so we all decided to go and make a weekend of it. Get an Airbnb, do some climbing, walks in Snowdonia, etc. In the evening, my husband and I drove to the nearest town and picked up a takeaway. It was probably about a 15-minute drive and it's in quite an old part of Wales, so the whole town is mostly narrow one-way streets. We were driving out of the town and on our way back to the main carriageway when we see this guy pacing quickly on the side of the road. He sees us driving towards him and he immediately jumps out into the road. By this point, we're doing about 15 miles an hour, so we could see if he needs help. We started to gather that he clearly wasn't someone in trouble, as you would usually just wave or stick your hand out. But as we got closer, I could see that he had one hand behind his back and a really weird smile on his face. This alarmed us. It was quiet, so my husband drove on the other side of the road to avoid him, but he runs out in front of our car again. My husband swerved back to the left side of the road and we avoided him, but not before he tried to grab the door handle and get into the car. Thankfully, we sped up and he didn't manage to get in. I was really freaked out, so we kept driving, and luckily he didn't try to pursue us. As I looked behind us to check, he just stood staring at us with something big in his hand. I couldn't make out what it was, but it must have been what he was hiding behind him. It was a residential area and people were out in town. I'm really worried that he had tried something with something else. The moment that we were all clear, I called the police and they sent someone out. I really hope that no one was harmed by him.